The United States government is now giving $1,000 to every baby born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028. It's called a Trump account, and according to the Treasury Department's Office of Tax Analysis, if you maximize contributions every year until your child turns 28, that account could grow to $1.9 million. $1.9 million. That's the official projection from the U.S. Treasury. The program launches mid-2026. Parents will be able to open accounts starting in May, and contributions begin on July 4th, 2026, according to the IRS. The federal government deposits $1,000. Parents and relatives can contribute up to $5,000 per year. Employers can chip in another $2,500. The money gets invested in low-cost U.S. stock index funds like the S&P 500, and it grows tax-deferred until the child turns 18. At age 18, the account becomes the child's property and gets treated like a traditional IRA. According to the Treasury's projections published in December 2025, if you contribute the maximum $5,000 every single year on your child's birthday from birth through age 17, the account could grow to anywhere between $191,500 and $676,400 by the time the child turns 18, depending on how the stock market performs. But if you keep contributing after age 18 and leave the money untouched until age 28, maximizing the account every year, the Treasury says it could reach $1.9 million. Even at the lower end of projected returns, it could still yield nearly $600,000. That sounds incredible. Who wouldn't want $1.9 million for their kid? But here's what nobody's talking about. The same government that's promising to give your newborn baby $1,000 and help them build wealth over the next 3 decades currently owes $38.45 trillion in national debt. That debt is growing by $8 billion per day. Interest payments on that debt just hit $355 billion in fiscal year 2026 so far, which is 19% of all federal spending. 19 cents of every dollar the government collects in taxes is going straight to paying interest on past borrowing. Not roads, not schools, not defense, just interest. And it's getting worse. The Congressional Budget Office projects that by 2055, interest on the debt will consume 28% of all federal revenue. More than 1 out of every 4 tax dollars will go to interest payments. The government is underwater, drowning in debt. And at the exact same moment, they're creating a program to give babies $1,000 and promising parents that if they contribute enough, their kids could become millionaires by age 28. So what's going on here? Is this a brilliant wealth-building program for the next generation? Or is it a political gimmick designed to distract from a fiscal crisis that's spiraling out of control? And how is the government planning to pay for this when they can't even pay the interest on the debt they already owe? Here's how Trump accounts actually work. The program is part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, known as OBBBA, which Trump signed into law in 2025. According to IRS Notice 2025-68 published on December 3rd, Trump accounts are a new type of custodial traditional IRA for minors. They're owned by the child but administered by an adult, usually a parent or guardian. The accounts become available on July 5th, 2026. You can't make any contributions before July 4th. Starting in May 2026, parents can open accounts by filing IRS Form 45, 47, or by using an online portal at trumpaccounts.gov. Once you submit the election, the Treasury Department sends you activation details. The Treasury itself sets up and administers the initial accounts. Later, families can roll the account over to a financial institution like Fidelity or Vanguard, but only after the initial Treasury account exists. Here's the contribution structure. The federal government makes a one-time $1,000 deposit for every U.S. citizen born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028. That's the pilot program. After that, individuals can contribute up to $5,000 per year during the growth period, which lasts until the child turns 18. The $5,000 limit is indexed to inflation starting in 2027. Employers can also contribute up to $2,500 per year to a Trump account for an employee or the employee's dependent, and that contribution doesn't count as taxable income for the employee. The employer contribution does count toward the $5,000 annual limit. So if your employer contributes $2,500, you can only add another $2,500 yourself. Governmental entities and charities can make what the IRS calls qualified general contributions. These don't count toward the $5,000 limit. For example, billionaire Michael Dell and his wife Susan pledged $6.25 billion to support Trump accounts. According to plan sponsors reporting from December 3rd, the Dell donation will provide an estimated $250 each to 25 million children. Michael Dell also said his company would match the $1,000 government contribution for each child of Dell employees. That means if you work for Dell and your child is eligible, your kid gets $1,000 from the federal government, $1,000 from Michael Dell, and up to $5,000 from you and other contributors for a total of $7,000 in the first year alone. But here's the restriction. During the growth period, before the child turns 18, the money must be invested in eligible investments only. According to the IRS guidance, an eligible investment is generally a mutual fund or exchange-traded fund that tracks the S&P 500 or another index of primarily U.S. companies. The fund must have annual fees and expenses below 0.1%, which is 10 basis points. No leverage is allowed. The idea is to keep it simple, low cost, and focused on long-term growth in U.S. equities. You can't put the money in a savings account. You can't buy individual stocks. You can't invest in crypto or gold or real estate. It has to be a low-cost U.S. stock index fund. And here's the kicker. You can't touch the money until the child turns 18. Withdrawals are generally prohibited during the growth period, except in cases of death or rollovers. Once the child turns 18, the Trump account converts into a traditional IRA. At that point, normal IRA rules apply. The child can withdraw money, but if they withdraw before age 59 and a half, they'll face a 10% early withdrawal penalty plus income taxes on the earnings, just like a traditional IRA. The Treasury Department says the accounts are designed to help children start their adult lives with something of value so that the concept of the American dream is still available to the next generation. That's the stated purpose. Give kids a financial head start. So how does the Treasury get from a $1,000 government deposit to $1.9 million by age 28? Let's break down the math. According to the Treasury's Office of Tax Analysis, there are 3 scenarios. Scenario 1 is government only. The federal government puts in $1,000 at birth. Nobody else contributes. The money sits in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund for 18 years. At the end of that period, when the child turns 18, the account will be worth somewhere between $3,000 and $13,800 depending on market performance. That's the range. Worst case, $3,000. Best case, $13,800. Not bad for doing absolutely nothing, but it's not life-changing money. Scenario 2 is maximum contributions until age 18. The government puts in $1,000. Then parents, relatives, and employers contribute the maximum $5,000 every year from the child's first birthday through age 17. That's 17 years of $5,000 contributions, which is $85,000 in total contributions, plus the initial $1,000 from the government, for a total of $86,000 in deposits. According to the Treasury, if you do that and leave the money invested in an S&P 500 index fund, the account will grow to somewhere between $191,500 and $676,400 by the time the child turns 18. The range is wide because it depends on stock market returns over those 18 years. If the market performs poorly, you get $191,000. If it performs well, you get $676,000. Either way, that's a significant nest egg for an 18-year-old. But here's where the $1.9 million comes from. Scenario 3 is maximum contributions until age 28. This assumes you don't stop contributing when the child turns 18. Instead, you keep going. From age 18 to age 28, the account is now in the child's name and treated like a traditional IRA. The contribution limits change slightly because it's now an IRA, but let's say you keep maxing it out every year. You contribute the maximum allowed under IRA rules for 10 more years. And critically, you don't withdraw any money. The account just keeps growing. According to the Treasury, if you do this, the account could reach $1.9 million by age 28 in the best case scenario. Even in a lower return scenario, it could still yield nearly $600,000. So the $1.9 million number requires 3 things. 1, someone has to contribute the maximum amount every single year from birth to age 28. That's 28 years of maxed out contributions. 2, the money has to stay invested in the stock market the entire time with no withdrawals. And 3, the stock market has to perform reasonably well over those 28 years. If all 3 of those things happen, yes, the account could theoretically hit $1.9 million, but how realistic is that? According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median household income in the United States is around $75,000. If you're earning $75,000 a year, can you afford to contribute $5,000 annually to a Trump account for your child? That's nearly 7% of your gross income before taxes. And that's just for one child. If you have 2 or 3 kids, you'd need to contribute $10,000 or $15,000 a year. For most American families, that's not realistic. The $1.9 million projection is a best-case scenario that assumes sustained maximum contributions over nearly 3 decades and strong stock market performance. It's possible, but it's not probable for the average family. So here's the question nobody in the White House wants to answer. How is the federal government paying for Trump accounts when the national debt is $38.45 trillion and growing by $8 billion per day? The answer is tariff revenue and massive cuts to healthcare. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the law that created Trump accounts, cost $3.4 trillion over 10 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office. That's $3.4 trillion in added deficits before you account for interest costs. With interest, the total cost rises to over $4.1 trillion, according to the Bipartisan Policy Center. To partially offset those costs, the law made deep cuts to Medicaid, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP, and federal student loan programs. It also relies on tariff revenue. The CBO estimates that tariffs will reduce deficits by $3.3 trillion over the next decade if they stay in place permanently. Add in $700 billion in interest savings from reduced borrowing, and you get $4 trillion in total deficit reduction from tariffs. On paper, the tariffs almost cover the cost of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. $4 trillion in tariff revenue versus $4.1 trillion in costs. Close enough, right? But here's the problem. The tariffs are a tax on American consumers. As I explained in my previous video, American households are paying $1,500 per year in tariff taxes. So when the government says Trump accounts are funded by tariff revenue, what they're really saying is, we're taxing you $1,500 a year through tariffs, and then we're giving your baby $1,000 and calling it a gift. You're paying for it. Not China, not Mexico, not Canada, you. And the Supreme Court could strike down the tariffs at any moment. The court heard arguments in November 2025 on whether Trump had the legal authority to impose tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The lower courts ruled he didn't. If the Supreme Court agrees, most of the tariff revenue disappears. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that if the IEPA tariffs are struck down, tariff revenue would fall from $4 trillion to only $850 billion over the next decade. That would leave a $3 trillion hole in the budget. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act would add $3 trillion to the deficit with no offsetting revenue. And Trump accounts would be funded entirely by cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, which help low-income families afford health care and food. So the same low-income families who can't afford to contribute $5,000 a year to a Trump account would be the ones losing health care and food assistance to fund the program for wealthier families who can afford to max out contributions. And even if the tariffs remain in place, the costs are front-loaded and the savings are back-loaded. According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act's costs peak in 2027 at over $540 billion in added deficits. The tariff savings don't fully materialize until later in the decade. In 2027, tariffs are projected to bring in about $80 billion, while the law adds $540 billion to the deficit. That's a $460 billion gap in just 1 year. How do you fill that gap? You borrow. You issue more Treasury bonds. You add to the national debt. And you pay more in interest. According to the CBO, interest payments on the national debt are now the fastest growing category of federal spending. In fiscal year 2026, interest is projected to hit $355 billion, which is 19% of all federal spending. By 2055, the CBO project's interest will consume 28% of all federal revenue. $1 out of every 4 the government collects in taxes will go to paying interest on past borrowing. And yet, at the same time, the government is launching a program to give babies $1,000 and promising parents that their kids could become millionaires if they contribute enough. It's financial insanity. Here's the part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that nobody wants to talk about. The same law that created Trump accounts also cut $1 trillion from Medicaid over 10 years. According to the Congressional Budget Office, 16 million people will lose health insurance by 2034 because of this law. 16 million. That breaks down as follows. 7.8 million people will lose Medicaid coverage due to work requirements, more frequent eligibility checks, and funding limits on state Medicaid expansion. 8.2 million will lose coverage when Enhanced Affordable Care Act tax credits expire at the end of 2025. And another 5 million already lost coverage on January 1st, 2026, when ACA subsidies for recent immigrants were eliminated. So, as of today, January 20th, 2026, 5 million people who had health insurance 3 weeks ago no longer have it. Most of them are lawfully present immigrants who were in the United States for less than 5 years. Under the old rules, these immigrants could qualify for marketplace subsidies even if their income was below the federal poverty level, because they were in the 5-year waiting period before they could qualify for Medicaid. The law eliminated that exception on January 1st. Now they have no subsidies and no Medicaid. They're uninsured. And here's the cruel irony. The people losing health care are disproportionately low-income families, the same families who can't afford to contribute $5,000 a year to a Trump account. According to the CBO's distributional analysis published in August 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act will raise the after-tax income of the richest 10% of Americans by 2.7% by 2034, mostly due to tax cuts. The poorest 10% will see their income fall by 3.1%, mostly because of cuts to programs like Medicaid and SNAP, which is food stamps. So the rich get richer through tax cuts. The poor get poorer through benefit cuts. And the government gives every baby $1,000 and calls it a gift, even though it's funded by cutting health care for the people who need it most. Starting in December 2026, adults aged 19 to 64 who receive Medicaid will have to prove they're working, volunteering, or receiving education or job training for at least 80 hours per month unless they qualify for an exemption. If you can't document those 80 hours every month, you lose coverage. Research from Arkansas, which tested similar requirements, found that work requirements don't increase employment, but do cause massive coverage losses. People who were eligible for Medicaid lost it anyway because they couldn't navigate the paperwork or didn't receive the notices in time. Starting in January 2027, Medicaid expansion enrollees will have to re-verify their eligibility every 6 months instead of every 12 months. That's twice as much paperwork. And according to experts, it will lead to massive churn, where people lose coverage due to missed deadlines or paperwork errors, not because they're actually ineligible. The bill also eliminates Medicaid eligibility for qualified aliens who are humanitarian entrants, restricting full Medicaid to U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, Cuban or Haitian entrants, and compact of free association residents. Emergency Medicaid funding for non-citizens was also decreased. And the bill restricts federal Medicaid funds for nonprofit organizations primarily engaged in family planning services that offer abortions, like Planned Parenthood. On top of all that, the deficit increase from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act triggers automatic cuts to Medicare under the statutory Pay-As-You-Go Act. The CBO estimates those cuts will total $490 billion from 2027 to 2034. So not only are 16 million people losing health insurance, but Medicare is getting cut by nearly $500 billion. And all of this is happening at the same time the government is launching a program to give babies $1,000 so they can build wealth and achieve the American dream. It's a transfer of wealth from the poor and the sick to the wealthy and the healthy, and it's being sold as a gift. So who actually benefits from Trump accounts? The answer is simple. Wealthy families who can already afford to save. According to analysts at the Roosevelt Institute, a progressive economic policy think tank, Trump accounts are deeply flawed and regressive. While the first $1,000 comes from the federal government, the real tax benefits go to wealthy families who can contribute up to $5,000 per year and avoid paying taxes on that money and all the investment gains. For low-income families struggling with daily expenses, making additional contributions is not a realistic option. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, more than 30% of Americans can't put together $400 for an emergency expense. If you can't afford $400 for an emergency, you can't afford $5,000 a year for a Trump account. The program assumes the problem is that people lack the incentive to save, but that's not the problem. The problem is that people lack disposable income. Representative Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts and economist Derek Hamilton wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post in June 2025, calling Trump accounts a regressive, ineffective policy masked as equity. They pointed out that the accounts fall drastically short of addressing the real hurdles Americans face. They wrote, quote, "These accounts are built on the presumption that individuals lack the incentive to save. In fact, what they lack is disposable income." Pressley and Hamilton urged Congress to reject Trump accounts and instead embrace baby bonds, a different proposal that would provide larger government contributions to low-income children and smaller contributions to wealthy children based on family income. Under the baby bonds proposal, a child born into poverty could receive up to $25,000 or more in government contributions by age 18, while a child born into wealth might receive nothing or a small amount. It's progressive, not regressive. It's designed to close the wealth gap, not widen it. But Congress rejected baby bonds and passed Trump accounts instead. Why? Because Trump accounts benefit the wealthy while appearing to help everyone. The racial wealth gap in America is stark. According to the Federal Reserve, white families' median wealth between 2019 and 2022 was more than $250,000 higher than black families' median wealth. That disparity is the result of decades of discriminatory policies in housing, banking, healthcare, taxes, education, and employment. Trump accounts do nothing to address that gap. In fact, they make it worse. A legal scholar who studies how taxes increase the gap in wealth and income between black and white Americans wrote in an analysis published in July 2025 that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act has provisions make existing wealth inequalities worse through broad tax cuts that disproportionately favor wealthy families while forcing costs on low and middle income Americans. The scholar called Trump accounts a missed opportunity to leverage fiscal policy to address the American wealth and income gap. Instead of investing in programs to lift up low and middle income Americans, the bill emphasizes a regressive approach that will further enrich the wealthy and deepen existing inequalities. Here's how it works in practice. A wealthy family earning $400,000 a year can easily max out contributions to Trump accounts for their kids. $5,000 a year is barely 1% of their income. They get the tax benefits, and their kids end up with hundreds of thousands or even $1 million by age 28. A low-income family earning $40,000 a year can't contribute anything beyond the government as $1,000. $5,000 a year would be 12.5% of their gross income. It's financially impossible, so their kid ends up with maybe $3,000 to $13,000 by age 18. The wealthy kid gets $1.9 million. The poor kid gets $13,000. That's a 146 to 1 ratio. Trump accounts don't close the wealth gap, they explode it. Now let's connect Trump accounts to the bigger crisis. The United States government is giving babies $1,000 while owing $38.45 trillion in national debt. On October 23, 2025, the national debt crossed $38 trillion for the first time according to the Treasury Department. As of today, January 20th, 2026, it's still climbing by roughly $8 billion per day. That's the amount we're borrowing every 24 hours just to keep the government running. In my previous videos, I've explained how this debt is creating what economists call fiscal dominance. Former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen warned on January 4, 2026, that the preconditions for fiscal dominance are clearly strengthening. She said, "Debt is on a steep upward trajectory toward 150% of GDP over the next 3 decades." What does fiscal dominance mean? It means the debt has gotten so large that the Federal Reserve can no longer control inflation without risking a government default. When Paul Volcker raised interest rates to 20% in 1980 to fight inflation, the national debt was only 25% of GDP. The government could afford higher interest rates because the debt was small. Today, debt is 120% of GDP. When the Fed raises rates, the government's interest payments explode. Those payments don't disappear. They flow back into the economy as income for bondholders, which can actually cause more inflation. The brake has become an accelerator. According to Fortune magazine's reporting, interest payments on the national debt hit $104 billion in just the first 9 weeks of fiscal year 2026. That's $11 billion per week. It already represents 15% of all federal spending in the current fiscal year. In fiscal year 2025, interest totaled $952 billion. By some projections, it will exceed $1 trillion annually within the next year or two. Interest is now the third largest category of federal spending after Social Security and Medicare, and it's about to become the second largest. According to the Congressional Budget Office, by 2055, interest will consume 28% of all federal revenue. That means more than 1 out of every 4 tax dollars will go to paying interest on past borrowing. Not schools, not roads, not defense, not healthcare, just interest. And here's the cruel irony. The same government that can't afford to pay the interest on its existing debt is launching a program to give babies $1,000 and telling parents their kids could become millionaires. But tariffs are a tax on American consumers. You're paying $1,500 per year in tariffs, and the government is turning around and giving your baby $1,000 of that back and calling it a gift. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, the revenue disappears, and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act adds $3 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. That means more borrowing, more debt, more interest. And the vicious cycle continues. In 2024, interest payments on the national debt surpassed spending on both Medicare and national defense for the first time in peacetime, according to Wikipedia's summary of Treasury data. We're now spending more to service past debt than we spend on the entire military or the entire Medicare program. And the debt keeps growing. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which includes Trump accounts, will add $4.1 trillion to the national debt over 10 years when you include interest costs. $4.1 trillion. So while the government is promising to help your baby build wealth, it's simultaneously drowning the country in debt that your baby will inherit. By the time a child born today turns 18 in 2044, the national debt could be $70 or $80 trillion or more. Interest payments could consume 40 or 50% of all federal revenue. The government might not be able to afford Social Security or Medicare anymore. And your kid's Trump account, even if it's worth a few $100,000, won't mean much if the currency has been devalued through inflation or if taxes have skyrocketed to pay for the debt. So let's bring this all together. Trump accounts sound amazing on the surface. The government gives your baby $1,000. You contribute up to $5,000 a year. The money grows tax-free in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. And according to the Treasury Department, if you max out contributions for 28 years, your kid could end up with $1.9 million. Who wouldn't want that? But here's what the government isn't telling you. Trump accounts are funded by tariff revenue that you're paying. The average American household is paying $1,500 per year in tariff taxes. The government takes that money and gives your baby $1,000 of it back. That's not a gift. That's your own money being recycled through the federal bureaucracy. And if you're a low-income family, you're not only paying the tariff tax, you're also losing health care. 16 million people will lose health insurance because of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that created Trump accounts. 5 million already lost coverage on January 1st. The program is funded by cutting Medicaid, cutting SNAP, and imposing tariffs on American consumers. Meanwhile, wealthy families who can afford to max out contributions get huge tax benefits and their kids end up with $1.9 million. Poor families who can't contribute anything beyond the government's $1,000 end up with maybe $13,000 by age 18. That's a 146 to 1 wealth gap. Trump accounts don't close the wealth gap, they explode it. And all of this is happening while the national debt is at $38.45 trillion and climbing by $8 billion a day. Interest on that debt is now consuming 19% of all federal spending. By 2055, it'll consume 28% of all federal revenue. The government is drowning in debt. And instead of addressing the crisis, they're launching a program to give babies $1,000 and telling parents their kids could be millionaires. It's a distraction. A political gimmick designed to make people feel good while the fiscal crisis spirals out of control. In my previous videos, I've explained how we got to 120% debt to GDP and why the Federal Reserve is now trapped in fiscal dominance. I've shown you how tariffs are a hidden tax that most people don't realize they're paying. And I've broken down why bond markets are starting to revolt against U.S. debt. Trump accounts are just the latest chapter in that story. A story of a government that's making promises it can't keep, funded by money it doesn't have, while cutting programs for the people who need them most. So if you're a parent or about to become one, should you open a Trump account when they become available in May? That's up to you. If you can afford to max out contributions every year for the next 18 or 28 years, sure, your kid could end up with a lot of money. But understand what you're actually participating in. You're participating in a wealth transfer from the poor to the rich, funded by tariffs you're paying and health care cuts for low-income families. And you're doing it in a country that owes $38 trillion and has no plan to pay it back. If you want to follow how this story unfolds, subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment below. Do you think Trump accounts are a good idea or a political gimmick? Are you planning to open one? Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.